Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hello, Pastor Heinz. How you doing, man?
Hi, Bernie.
Hi.
How you do?
Oh, baby, how are you doing? Not too bad.
Good,
to,
good.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to hear you. Good to hear you.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Vince, you want to Kevin or assume? I don't see him on there yet.
Hi, Vinny.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing all right, man.
Good. Should we start?
Give Kevin another minute or so. He not normally late.
Okay. Just for the interest of the panelists and everyone present, I'm going to ask each panelist simply to say who you are and brief comments on your relevant professional experience. And then I'm going to ask Pastor Heinz to introduce himself as well and give the opening prayer. Thereafter, we'll move into the questions. Thank you. I see Kevin is here now, so it's 1 o'clock. The appointed time has come. My name is Vincent Earwood, and the privilege is mine today to be the moderator for this discussion session, which is part of the ongoing education in the fight, the people's fight against this virus, COVID-19. As I have indicated, we'll start by asking each panelist to say who he or she is. I'll start in the order in which it is on the poster, and then also indicate your professional experience, and then we move into a word of prayer and the questions. So do we start with Dr. McCoby, please?
Hello, everyone. I think most individuals know me as Sherry Lynn Green. I'm the daughter of Elton and Serena Green, granddaughter of Eileen Hinkson. I'm a family medicine physician trained in the United States and currently the chief medical officer of the Jane Pauley Community Health Center, which is a federally qualified health center that is tasked with the management and care of 26,000 patients and several hundred staff members. So it's a pleasure to be on the call this afternoon.
Thank you. Dr. Selvin?
Yeah, my name is Selwyn Carrington. Everybody knows me as Bernie. Hi, Sherry. Say hi to your mommy and dad for me next time you see them. And I am trained as a clinical endocrinologist. I also have a PhD in public health, and I do a lot of health education and research activities, guiding clinical studies, basically. And I am here to help out this afternoon. I'm probably the oldest person on the panel, so I'm going to be here for the benefit of experience. I remember Sherry when she was just a medical student at Duke.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Edwards?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Omar Edwards. I am a physician working with the Ministry of Health and Wellness in Barbados. I work mainly on the public health aspect of things at this time, dealing with the COVID-19 response in Barbados.
Thank you. Dr. Stewart?
Hi, my name is Dr. Kevin Stewart. Kevin, I'm also from Barbados, born and raised, and studied in England. Currently a consultant in chemical pathology, metabolic medicine at Leeds University Hospital, covering a population of 675,000, tertiary referral center. I'm the clinical lead for biochemistry. And I also did an MPH as well, as Selwyn did. And so I hope to give some advice this evening, hopefully up to my knowledge and understanding and experience.
Thank you. Dr. Bradshaw?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I think most of you guys know me as Mark, much like Sherry and Kevin, Berea born and raised as well. I currently work as a hospitalist. I've been working in the practice of medicine for the past 10 years or so. and currently serve as a section chief of medicine at Piedmont Fayette Hospital, which is a suburb just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Looking forward to share any information and answer hopefully any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you, Dr. Bradshaw. Pastor Hines, introduction followed by prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pastor Granville Hines of the Berea Seventh-day Adventist Church. I would have been working as a pastor of the East Caribbean Conference of Seventh-day Adventists since 2012 to present.
Thank you. Opening prayer.
Let us pray. Oh, Heavenly Father, this evening we are extremely thankful for this opportunity to share very important information with our audience. We pray, Heavenly Father, that as we go through this afternoon's program, that you guide our thoughts. Help us, Lord, to so share in such a way that those who are listening will be well informed so that they can make sensible decisions. Continue to bless us all, take full charge of the evening's proceedings. Is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. And thank you all the panelists for those words of introduction. The format today will be primarily questions and answers rather than detailed presentations by the panelists. What we will do, to start it off, I will pose a general question to Dr. Edwards, and then thereafter we'll take questions from the audience. Just indicate that you have a question by pressing on the raise your hand icon so we could recognize you, and we'll take you in hopefully the order in which you come through. And also we have received many questions which have been previously submitted. I will intersperse those as we go through the afternoon based on where we are in the discussion. That said, let me pose the first introductory question to Dr. Edwards. What is the current COVID-19 situation in Barbados? And in your opinion, do we need a vaccine? Dr. Edwards?
Thank you for your question. So the Barbadian context, the official COVID-19 response began March 2020 for Barbados. All right, the initial stages went pretty steady, where most of our cases were imported cases into the island. We're currently in the phase, however, of community spread, though, in Barbados. So our current situation stands, we have over 2,700 cases. Now, just to get a base context, our population would be about 300,000. This would include citizens and long-term residents. So we're looking at about 0.9% currently with the officially laboratory confirmed cases at this point, okay? We've had 31 deaths so far over this campaign. So that's about 0.01% of our death rate due to COVID-19. We've also commenced now in Barbados over a week now, our mass vaccination campaign. So today it is also ongoing. So we're over 14,500 vaccinations given against COVID-19 at this point. So we hope by the end of this weekend to have covered about 5% of the Barbadian population with our ongoing vaccination campaign.
Thank you. In general, do we need a vaccine in Barbados given the current situation? Or can we get by without it?
No, I would say that the vaccine is a critical tool here now in our fight against COVID-19, especially given the context of community spread. Of course, we would look also at the context of hospitalization in Barbados. We have a small nation. You're looking at a small hospital system, really. One major medical facility, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and we've opened additional isolation centers to accommodate COVID-19. But of course, hospitalization would be a cost to us and a significant factor in the fight against COVID-19. So the vaccine, we're looking at this rollout, and we also hope that we will see a decrease in the severe hospitalization cases. So that's a major factor now for Barbados, given the strain on our existing resources. So with the vaccine, we look to prevent severe disease, and deaths. So we hope to get a decreased hospitalization rate as the vaccine campaign rolls out.
Mr. Yearwood, can I add a
Sure.
insert on that comment? Which I think is an excellent comment. With the morbidity, mortality, economic impact, social dysfunction that is occurring in any country, I would dare say that vaccines are definitely needed. And I think the good doctor, Dr. Edwards, is right on point. And I think that the island of Barbados, my home, should be actively involved in promoting utilization of vaccines.
All right, a question which could probably counter that. What is the status of natural and herbal cures? I mean, can they work in this a setting such as this? Dr. Carrington?
There is no natural or herbal cure for COVID-19, at least none that we know of, and one that has been tested and documented to be effectual in the lives of individuals, and that can be used in a wide scale format. So because of that deficiency, I cannot recommend natural or herbal cures for COVID. To the best of my medical knowledge, the best treatment here is prevention. And that's why we work with mitigating efforts to prevent the disease. We do not have a cure. There are very few viruses that there are cures for. So I cannot encourage that kind of behavior at this time.
One view that has been circulating quite a bit is that people aren't against the vaccination process, but they're concerned that this vaccine was developed so quickly, and hence they are equating speed with lack of safety. Do we have any reason to be concerned in this regard? Any of the other doctors, please.
Well, before I answer that question, I do want to step back for a little bit and lay the groundwork, at least from my perspective, for my reason for wanting to participate in this. I think that most individuals may not understand the impact of COVID yet in Barbados and may be seeing it as an inconvenience. And I'm sure from Dr. Edwards' perspective, he can give some personal accounts of why it is not just a simple inconvenience, why we need to take this seriously. And I will share, something that helped me come to the realization. Of course, I'm in healthcare. Of course, I knew this was serious. But I tell my family members all the time, I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. And when the state crossed 432 deaths, and I realized that I had 430 contacts in my phone, that's when it got real for me. So for me, being able to pick up my phone and realize if none of these people existed, right? That was the death toll in the state at the time. How would I feel? What would my impact be? So, I also want to draw attention to the facts and the health data available for Barbados, looking at the mortality in Barbados. The top cause of death in Barbados is basically heart attacks followed by strokes, right? And so, we have a disease that thrives in conditions such as those, where the baseline population is already prone to heart attacks and strokes, and COVID comes in and accelerates what could have happened before. So I can't really continue without taking time to just stress that point. And I'm sure Kevin and Mark will have similar views. So I'll let one of them take the question.
Yeah, I'll come in there. So it is unusual, I think, as well, that the vaccine was developed quickly, because we all know the process of time that it normally takes for new developments to occur. But in the crisis, what we had was collaborative working and working in series rather than parallel. So because we did sections of the development at the same time as other sections, it meant that once the data was collected for those sections, it all could be analyzed in one go. The other thing to say is that the technology involved in the vaccine has been in development for a very long time, even from the 1970s. But closer to our time, there were trials with the SARS one and also MERS as well. And so we learned from all of these things. And so when it came to the climax of the pandemic, there was about 1 or 2 medicines that were mRNA based or with the same similar technology. And so, pivoting that into COVID, once the virus was sequenced, it actually seems to everyone on looking, not involved in the actual research, that it happened very quickly. But I would say that none of the corners were cut. We've got the data analyzed from several independent bodies to the teams that developed the vaccines. And again, collaborative working in parallel actually shortened what would possibly have taken 5 years down to just over 12 months. So I think it shows the kind of seriousness of the pandemic as well, that we needed to use vaccines in order to potentially get out of this.
I guess the only other point that I would add to all of this as well is the significant amount of resources that were poured into the development of the vaccine. When we consider that the 3 major vaccines on the market, the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the AstraZeneca vaccine, were all funded by the US government to the tune of several $billion. And you also consider that generally for healthcare companies, vaccines are not very profitable, which is one of the reasons why, one, there tends to be reluctance in development of vaccines. The fact that many of these companies did not have to expend their own money to develop the vaccines also sort of led to it being developed a lot more expeditiously than it otherwise would have.
Thank you. A question was submitted asking this rather provocative question. Has the virus been isolated? If no, explain how a vaccine can be made for a virus that was not isolated. If it was, where can I find the information to support this?
I'll start that one off. The virus has been isolated. The RNA has been sequenced. That's how we know what the spike protein molecular structure is like. And that's how we are able to do that. I remember, as I said, I'm the oldest one here. I remember when HIV first came out, I went to medical grand rounds, and there were some doctors in the crowd saying there's no HIV. We don't have any virus. All we have is antibodies. So there's no HIV. And they had this huge disruption in the medical conference because a group of doctors didn't believe in HIV. Needless to say, today we all know that HIV is a reality. It has killed a lot of people and has caused a lot of hurt and pain to people. And the development, well, the finding and development of this virus is well documented from China to Russia to the United States and by many clinical labs. So it's not hard to find that. And if you don't believe American scientists, you can ask Chinese scientists, you can ask Cuban scientists, you can ask Russian scientists, everybody who has sequenced the genome and know what it's all about. You can get the information from them, and you can know that a virus does exist. Kevin, you want to add anything to that?
It's a provocative question, because if we talk technically, a virus cannot necessarily exist external to itself. It needs some kind of mechanism to multiply itself and therefore promote itself and have one generation to the next. So I think this person is asking that question as well, quite provocatively from that angle. But yes, I would agree with Selwyn that, we have not only the sequencing for the RNA, but we also were able to make antibodies as well to the spike protein, and also develop tests and kits to look for not only the actual virus from PCR testing, but also look at antibody testing, to test to see if you have antibodies. So we've kind of got a full circle, but if you ask isolation in terms of, is the virus outside of anything else but itself, that may be very difficult to come by. But essentially, we have all the information to diagnose, test, and to follow antibodies either after vaccination to see how long they're lasting, or after an infection to see how long they're lasting.
Yeah, I just want to add as well, while Selwyn and Kevin were answering, I did a quick Google search because the person was asking, where can I find the information? And a quick Google search led me to sequencing from January of 2020 from France. So the information is out there. You just have to look for reputable sources. But to echo their points, it's been well known that it's been sequenced for some time and from multiple different entities as well.
Okay. A question which obviously this person has had the benefit of vaccinations before. Person says the polio, measles, chickenpox, these vaccines were all preventative. Once they've been administered to persons, they never became affected again. What about the vaccine now for COVID? Is this situation similar? In other words, if you are vaccinated for COVID, are you guaranteed that you will not catch COVID again?
So I think I'll start on that one. Okay. So the primary purpose of the current vaccines against COVID-19 are to prevent or really decrease the amount of severe disease that you would get from actually contracting COVID. A person that is vaccinated can still, of course, catch COVID-19, but they're likely to have a less severe course. Now, there's also a public health component to that question, because when you speak of the previous diseases like measles and these other diseases, you have to appreciate that there's been successful mass vaccination campaigns against those diseases. So for example, in Barbados, we have an excellent vaccination coverage. So our children would receive the MMR vaccine, and you would have over 85% coverage of the population against that particular disease. So that would translate to what we consider to be herd immunity. So you're not going to see a case of measles in Barbados hardly, unless it's an imported case, because we've developed a population that the majority of it has received the vaccine against, for example, measles. So you may see a sporadic case, yes, but even if you do see a case like that, you're not going to get any extensive community spread because you have a base of vaccinated individuals. So we hope as the COVID-19 situation evolves, you would have two things going on. Persons that would have recovered from the COVID-19 and stay well, they would have some natural immunity. You would have persons that would have been vaccinated and would have a form of immunity from that perspective. So when you start to get an increasing population with some immunity or resistance to a particular disease, you're going to see less incident. So everybody will benefit as a result of that. So there are two things going on with the vaccine. You have an individual effect, and you would also have a population-based effect once you achieve a reasonable coverage of vaccinated or recovered individuals.
If I may comment on this as well, if that's all right. I like to give an example with respect to this question of whether or not the vaccine itself prevents infection. In medicine, what we are most concerned about, by and large, isn't whether or not a person is infected. The question is ultimately whether or not that infection produces disease, i.e. symptoms for a person, right? As individuals, as we traverse our normal lives on a day-to-day basis, the reality is we come in contact with dozens, probably hundreds of various bacteria, probably several viruses on a day-to-day basis. But we aren't generally terribly concerned about those bacteria viruses that we encounter because the overwhelming majority of them do not cause disease. So if we were to accept, and I would argue that the most recent data suggests that at least the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccines appear to confer some reduced transmissibility of the virus itself. But if that weren't true, and the only benefit of this disease was, or the benefit of the vaccine was, that it made the individual who was vaccinated less susceptible to severe disease, essentially the effect of being vaccinated, especially on mass scale, is that you would essentially render this virus as being an irrelevant virus. Who cares if you're infected if ultimately you don't have symptoms? And so I think before we even get to the point of determining whether or not there is some effect on transmissibility, the fact that if we were able to reach quote unquote herd immunity, i.e. a critical number of people are vaccinated, essentially what that does is render the SARS-CoV-2 virus to being a meaningless virus at that time, because at that point it really doesn't cause disease for human beings.
I mean, just to add to that as well, to the question, we already have, we have multiple variants of COVID-19, but we've got three of concern, variants of concern. We've got the Kent strain, we've got the South African and the Brazilian. And this is in the space of a year, or shorter. And so the rate of change of COVID-19, first potentially, potentially jumping species to man, and now in man, it's changing quite rapidly as well. The question is, how long does the immunity last? And, we don't know. That's why we're doing several studies looking at, antibody load and also at what point did the antibodies start to fall off? So in the UK, for instance, even if someone has had COVID-19, if they're still in the high risk population, there's still asked to get vaccinated after a certain point after recovery. So the question is, why isn't it not like polio and measles and other things? All viruses are different. This one seems to be changing very rapidly. We know about the flu virus as well. The flu, we get, very changes in strains every year, and the flu vaccine is updated every year. And this seems to be on that kind of pathway where, it may potentially have vaccine escape. And with all the new strains, we might have to update the vaccines in order to provide coverage for further years. But this is all new, and like Mark says, it's about preventing disease. And the Oxford AstraZeneca or the COVAX, which we have in Barbados, I think it's said to be about 70% reducing transmissibility to others, but definitely helps to reduce severe disease. So all of these factors need to be considered.
Building on what you've just said, is it necessary to vaccinate a person who has already been infected with the COVID virus, since it's expected that the person would have or should have developed antibodies?
As I mentioned, I'll go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the current CDC recommendations are that persons who have had disease, who was diagnosed with COVID, should defer vaccination for approximately 90 days. I would say, though, that there are several caveats to that. There's some evidence that suggests the more severe the disease process is in the individual, the more robust the immune response may be. And so that individual may potentially have a greater number of antibodies that may last for a longer period of time compared to someone who may have had a milder form of disease. And this is really a question ultimately that should be posed to your primary care physician, because one could appreciate that if a person had asymptomatic COVID, but is in the high risk population, then that 90-day principle may not necessarily be one that you want to follow very strictly. This may be someone that you may perhaps check for antibodies 30 days
Oh,
out
dear, dear,
or
dear.
60 days out to determine whether or not those antibodies are still present. And if they're not, to maybe proceed with vaccination ahead of that 90-day recommended window. So it's an involved question, but the answer is yes. If you were diagnosed with COVID, the recommendations are that you eventually become vaccinated, and that current recommendation from the Center for Disease Control is about 90 days after the initial diagnosis.
Okay, thank you. I have a live question coming in the chat. It says, can you have Dr. Omar explain how herd immunity can develop if the vaccine does not provide immunity? If individuals can still catch and transmit the virus, how is herd immunity possible? Also, with the AstraZeneca vaccine, this causes the body to produce key proteins of the virus. What mechanism is in place to turn the body's replication of the protein, and how can we be sure this will not result in development of the autoimmune conditions? Well, let's break this question into bits, and let's take the first part first to Dr. Omar. How can herd immunity be developed if the vaccine does not provide immunity?
All right, so first thing, I guess there'll be varying scales of immunity, but how best to put this situation? Okay, you're going to have a vaccine delivered to a wide amount of the population. Now you're looking at really, there's an issue of symptomatic disease, and there's an issue of transmissibility. All right, so we're using the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine here in Barbados. So the current evidence is pointing to at least a 70% reduction in symptomatic disease when persons receive this vaccine. Now, certainly outside the household unit, when a person is, shall we say, less symptomatic, they should be less likely to spread disease when they interact out in the community as a whole. Now, you also have the issue of what we call a neutralizing antibody response. So this is one of the things that would have been investigated with this particular vaccine, and it's demonstrated that it does have a neutralizing antibody response. Now, we're still waiting on additional data to see how effective that is, but that will also certainly play a role in decreasing the transmissibility of the particular COVID-19. So I guess it's a combination of things too. If you decrease symptomatic disease in your population, you should have less spread, certainly in the community, outside of the households. We will wait to see how the research points to the neutralizing antibody effect. But again, this vaccine is new now, but the vaccine will be improved upon as well. Okay, so the current situation too in Barbados is not devastating. So if we can decrease certainly the amount of clinical disease on island, you're going to have less spread, and hopefully we want to move towards some form of elimination. But it's a complex situation, and it's a fair question. We're looking at the research, but vaccines are improved over time. So I mean, they're already going to work on improving the vaccine to counter, for example, the South African variant, and you have to give the research some time. When this Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was first released, they were looking at the efficacy of about 62% against severe disease. WHO has already put that value up a bit to 63.09%. But again, against symptomatic disease, we have a 70% efficacy there. And we're also looking at increasing the interval between dosing of the Oxford vaccine. So the research is currently pointing towards once you've increased the interval between the first and the second doses, you have an increased efficacy already. So somewhere up to 81%. So you have to give the science and the research a little time. You've deployed the vaccine now in a practical setting outside of the clinical research trials. And as you actually get feedback on your populations, you will begin to see the actual true effect of the vaccine. So already by changing the dosing interval from from between 4 weeks between the first and the second doses, we are already seeing that you have improved efficacy of the vaccine. Now, that would also be a good sign if you're going to move towards achieving herd immunity. No country would have necessarily dependent on one single vaccine. This is what we've made to start with. And of course, we're looking at other options as well.
Okay. Can individuals who are allergic to certain foods and chemicals take any of the COVID vaccines? Let's take one of the overseas doctors, please.
So I think in this context, it may be more relevant to speak to the vaccine available in Barbados. I do want to go back to the points that Dr. Edwards made and just reiterate. I think I heard that question with a different lens. I heard the question mainly in terms of individuals essentially asking why get it now, or why get a vaccine if it's only 60 to 70%. So I agree that we are still learning as we go. I agree that we will need more studies. I agree that we have recommendations based on the information we have now, but I also don't want individuals to walk away from this thinking that it's okay to wait. The purpose of this panel is to make sure that questions are answered and individuals have all the information they need to make a personal decision, but we don't want to hold out for 100% when we have a disease that can cause severe mortality and morbidity as well. So the example that I like to use is, if you're fundraising and you want to raise $100 and somebody gives you 70, are you going to say no? Because I want all 100 at the same time. We have to just work with where we are, and that will give us a head start. So yeah, that's all I'll say on that point. Thanks.
So I think the question was whether or not there were persons with allergies and their suitability for the vaccine. So AstraZeneca has actually put out a relatively short list of several chemicals that most of us have never heard of individuals who have allergies to these various chemicals should not have the vaccine. The only two on that list that maybe even remotely, may sound remotely familiar, are individuals who are allergic to ethanol and sucrose. And I find it hard to believe anyone in Barbados is allergic to sucrose. So the answer would be, by and large, the vast majority of people in Barbados should be more than fine with the vaccine.
Well, to add to that, sorry, Kevin.
Sorry, yeah, to add to what Mark is saying is,
Okay, then.
I agree. It is been put out by the.
I send via WhatsApp, but you see, not be reading. The panelists are reading them because I can see they're looking at them, but I send them to the panelists.
Mute him.
Could all persons please mute their mics if they're not speaking? Thanks.
Yeah. So as I was saying, so the company has actually put out a statement, as Mark has said, and essentially the statement is, anyone with allergies can have the vaccine provided they're not allergic to any of the constituents of the vaccine specifically. So the advice would be to ask for the contents of the vaccine first, and to go through that list with your doctor. And as long as you're assured by them that you don't have an allergy to these things, then it should be safe to go ahead and have the vaccine. And that's from I could actually read what they say specifically. They say, allergies, anyone with a previous history of allergic reactions to the ingredients of the vaccine should not receive it. But those with any other allergy, such as food allergy, can now have the vaccine. And this was released on the 30th of December, 2020.
Yeah, I do want to add from a practical administration standpoint as well, that you don't get the vaccine and walk away, right? And people wave at you and say goodbye, see you later. There's an observation period universally, regardless of the vaccine that you receive. Yeah. So all of the protocols are centered around making sure that you are observed and monitored for the recommended period with each vaccine as well. So I think individuals should find comfort in that practical application and the protocols developed by the health authorities.
If I could just add to what Sherry was saying as well, because I believe there was a question that came in earlier with respect to...
Alvin Hall is ready again. Comment. And there's some questions in the chat. Check the chat, and there's Alvin Hall. And I guess there's another question that just came to me.
Okay. With respect to pre-medication prior to the vaccine, so the recommendations are now that you probably do not want to pre-medicate before the initial dose of the vaccine because it could have the effect of masking or delaying any potential side effects, some of which may be serious. Once the reaction to the initial vaccine is known, though, pre-medication before the second dose, if you had some mild reaction, is allowable. But you probably do not want to take antihistamines prior to the first dose. Like Sherry said, at least a period of 30 minutes is typically recommended post administration to determine whether or not a person develops symptoms. And you certainly wouldn't want to mask any potential reaction that you may be having for that 30-minute period of time.
Okay, thank you. One of our guests, Alvin Holder, is there a vaccine question? Go ahead, Alvin.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, thanks. My name is Alvin Holder, and Angela Blackman is my cousin, dear cousin of mine through my mother. And I'm an associate professor in chemistry at Old Dominion University. I studied in Jamaica for my BSc and my PhD. And I heard that something was regarding about herbs in fighting the COVID-19. And I would say I have a friend who contracted the virus in London, forensic nurse, and he used the broadleaf thyme, garlic, and a whole set of things that we would use in Barbados and fought it. My cousin Mary, her mother brought it home in Philadelphia, gave it to Mary, her father who died, and Mary contacted me, got a broadleaf thyme, and fought it. And a student that I'm mentoring from Fayetteville State University, just next door in North Carolina, she had it in her father, and it gave them the recipe. So, so it's been documented that the broadleaf thyme and everything can work. So I wouldn't discredit good herbal medicine, but not to say that people should stop taking the vaccine. And I would say that a lot of my friends who are biomedical research, like me, we're going to wait until version 20 comes because of the fact that, the trials that they've carried out and everything was rushed, and they're not saying about the allergies, how many people have died. And I know that the pharmaceutical firms are trying to make money, and the British government and in France will really like that. They can outsource the vaccine producers, that people can make it than just rely on money. But in short, herbal medicine that we've utilized for years can work, and there's proof and living proof. Is not any joke, whatsoever. But social distancing, wear your mask, because I'm in here in Virginia, many people don't do it, and we're very cautious. It killed my former patient advisor on April the 20th last year. He was 79, and he was the 6th statistics in Jamaica, and Jamaica is probably approaching 16,000 cases. But just to show you, it's a serious disease, and it should not be laughed at. And thanks, Angela, and thanks, Roger, and thanks for inviting me to come and say something.
So I want to address that. There are several things. So first of all, I want to start out with the herbal remedies. And I would request that the specific recipe be shared. And
Sure.
as with any study, you would need a control group. So who's the control group of individuals who are similar in health conditions, age, et cetera, that we can compare the broadleaf thyme group to, in order to make an informed decision about if the treatment was actually successful or not. So that's layer number one. You mentioned the economic impact of COVID and individuals wanting to benefit from the COVID vaccine financially. I would ask a question for the purpose of discussion, specifically, what is the economic impact of the deaths? So, here in the United States, we are just shy of 500,000 individuals who have died. So, I think sometimes often we may be a little bit too quick to point a finger to capitalism, a system and structure that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But we miss the human element of this and the impact, like I said, of the deaths we've already had, the economies that are collapsing because of this. So, you know, while I support anyone wanting to consume garlic, thyme, or any other flavorful herb for their personal benefit, I think we really need to be careful when we say things like this in the general setting and encourage people to do that without, one, like I said, strict recipes, or two, the actual studies so that they can make an informed decision.
Well, as a chemist, I believe in reproducibility and replication, and I do in solid science, and I can provide all of the primary sources, the good articles as well, because I just don't go say anything unless I have proof, and my work will tell you that as well. But my friend is a year older than me, and some people who are actually close approaching 60 in years, they're the ones who have taken it, and not only just one, but also apply. And many people don't realize too, honey is good for fighting sepsis. So just to show, he was my good friend, he was very afraid of in London of going to the hospital. I told him to go, and he wouldn't go, but he used it and fought it. Mary used it, and she told me that when she took the turmeric, guess what? Her chest inflammation went down. And when she didn't take the turmeric, it got worse. And when I gave it to her, she recovered. But the only problem she has now is a bulging disc and affecting her nerves in her back.
I guess the only well, not the only, but a couple of things that I would add to this is it's important to recognize that there's a difference between association and causation, right? When you look at the natural history of persons infected with COVID, the overwhelming majority of individuals do well and will recover, right? And for many of them, regardless of what they may have taken during that period of time, most of them would probably recover. The fact that recovery occurred when exposed to a particular herb does not necessarily link, i.e. causal relationship between improvement of disease and the herb that was administered. Now, admittedly, I will also say that the absence of studies looking at herbs doesn't necessarily mean that broadleaf thyme doesn't work as well, right? The reality is no one really knows. But in a setting where we have, a disease that causes death, I think it is important that we stress as well that using medical therapies that carry robust science behind it is probably something we want to encourage, particularly because we also don't know what the negative impact of these various herbs may potentially have on the therapeutic modalities that may be utilized as well. So that's not to suggest that the broadleaf thyme isn't working or wouldn't work, but I think it's important that we also stress that these are conversations that you probably need to have, the individual really needs to have with their physician, who could then perhaps advise them specifically about any untoward potential effects that may occur with respect to any natural remedies someone may or may not want to take.
Well, I was stressed. I'm not talking about broadleaf thyme, but there's a doctor in Florida, Cuban, who studied in Puerto Rico. He is trying to raise money, us I should say, to utilize I should say some synthetic natural products, not many natural products, and some synthetic inorganic compounds as well. But there's proof in the literature where I don't know if doctors and chemists and biomedical engineers should collaborate. And the only thing I would stress though is that people in the Caribbean really need to collaborate with scientists who are over here, because more important is, and we've seen it with Ebola, whatever the Western, the first world countries push, the third world country will take, but they will not look up and believe their own. And that is something that's really killing the Caribbean. There are many Caribbean centers over here. And I would say there's people in Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, wherever they are, they really, really need to reach out with the chemists over here. And those that are retired, who's been working on things like this for many, many years and have great publications. Even University of West Indies too. Many people don't believe when they utilize the University of West Indies. And to be honest, we know health disparities. Many people don't believe people of African descent. And to be honest too, is that we have the same brain. I would say too is this: we need to trust each other and look at people who have a good reputation and just, like for example, what I do it not for money or whatever. And my friends that we are collaborating on this project too, and people who have published, we all need to work together. To be honest, I would say that too. And we just don't rely on just herbal medicine too, but there's evidence there. And more important, if people will really look at these people who have actually recovered and use them as a model, of course, placebos and controls that will have to be carried out. But there's evidence of people, even in New York, who have used moringa and other things and using herbal medicine. I know people don't believe in the Rastafarians as well, but there's evidence. It happens all from the days of slavery on the ship where the Africans brought over all the medicinal herbs and even helped the same white man who were really struggling as well with diseases too. So it's been passed on for over generation, but the science need to be on the forefront and published too in top peer-reviewed journals. But there are some over there too, even third world country journals that are there that the big top journals and publishers don't believe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holder.
Can I just make a comment, Vincent? Yeah, so I would also say we're possibly comparing, apples and pears as well, because the vaccine is not necessarily a treatment. It's a preventative measure, as Selwyn said. And so, no one would not say, take your fresh air, take your exercise, get your rest, take a balanced fruit and vegetable rich diet, green vegetables, make sure you get your vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc. No one would stop you from doing any of that. In fact, we would encourage that. If you're a bit overweight, you've got weight around the middle, we would advise to lose weight. And all these things are preventative measures. The vaccine is also a preventative measure. And as Dr. Edwards said, it is clear that it prevents serious disease, and that's what, and also prevents transmission. So it's not, to say that it is a cure. It is not a cure. It's a preventative measure, and I guess a lot of this discussion is based around about risk, and that's why I guess Dr. Bradshaw and Mark is suggesting that we have discussions with our doctor, because everybody's situation is different. And it's about a balance of risk and benefit. But from taking all the preventative lifestyle measures that we can, eating all the natural remedies that we can, I would still say it prevents you from having a significant disease, and would advise vaccination. And the other thing was stated in the comments, again, was, that waiting for version 20. I think, yes, I would agree. We don't have long-term data, and that's why it's still being collected and ongoing as we are. But we have enough data to provide, efficacy and safety data to say that it does work and it is safe to use. And therefore, for all populations, it should be something that one should potentially think about seriously taking, especially if you have underlying diseases, or in the high risk category group.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I would like to ask a question, please.
Sure.
Yes, please. This is for Dr. Omar. Yes, please. If you are allergic to antibiotics like amoxicillin and penicillin, is that vaccine is for you?
Okay, so the vaccine will still be administered to persons that have allergies once it's not to a specific part of the vaccine that we're given or the vaccine itself, okay? Now, there are going to be some basic guidelines for the monitoring post-vaccination. So for most persons, they'll get a 15-minute monitoring period. If a person has indicated to us that they have allergies of any particular severity, especially to injectable drugs or other vaccines in the past, we're going to monitor them for 30 minutes. So that'll be twice the standard time. Observe if there are any issues in that regard. But yes, the vaccine will still be indicated for those persons allergic to penicillin or sulfur.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question which was submitted. How would you rate the AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, Sputnik, Johnson & Johnson vaccines in terms of efficacy? Which vaccines are the most suitable for persons in the Caribbean?
Okay, now
Okay. Go ahead, Omar.
There are several components to that. First of all, the majority of the world would like to get their hands on a vaccine for COVID-19, any vaccine at this point. Now, there are always going to be differences. I mean, they've been made different places, different manufacturers, but you have some effective products going to market. So that is the key. That's the key thing to take away from. So of course, in the United States, you would have the Pfizer and Moderna readily accessible. For Barbados, though, we do live in a warmer climate. We will have some challenges, of course, with a sub-zero vaccine like Pfizer. So there are other issues. Of course, we will use it if we do get our hands on it, yes, but you have to think about logistics as well and getting it to the majority of the population. So in terms of temperatures and environmental stability, the Oxford vaccine is ideal for us. It's what we're accustomed to using within our existing cold chain. So standard refrigeration requirements. So it's very good for us to deploy on a mass scale, and we've already begun to do that in Barbados. The efficacy, of course, would vary between the different vaccines. Pfizer, very high, of course, above 90%. But again, you're looking to get your hands on an effective vaccine and to start to use it at this point.
I agree. I think Dr. Makumbe answered this already when she said, if you're doing a fundraiser and you are going to get, and you want $100 and people are giving you 20 or at least 70 in this particular instance, 60 to 70, are you going to take it or are you not going to take it? The object here is to provide some protection. My analogy is, if your house is on fire and you only have 70% of the water to out the fire and to prevent severe damage to the house, are you going to say, let me wait until I get all the water? No, you don't wait until you get all the water. You go and you use the water that you have because you know it's going to prevent a significant amount of damage. So as a consequence, that becomes the MO, what you're going to be working on here. We're not working to cure every person in Barbados. We're working to prevent disease as much as possible and hopefully build a level of immunity that the country can survive and come back to reasonably normal activities as quickly as possible. That's why we use whatever vaccine is available to get us to that level.
Okay. Another provocative question. Why should healthy persons in the 20 to 40 age group take the COVID vaccine, given that thus far in Barbados, persons in this age group are not dying from the virus? Interesting.
So I'll start off by stating a couple things. I think in this context, it would be simple to say I'm not impacted, therefore I don't act. But I think life has a way of showing us that we are impacted by each other. So even though persons in the 20 to 30 age group are less likely to have severe disease, we know that they would unfortunately play a role in transmission of disease and impact other people. So I get it, but at the same time, we have a responsibility And it's our responsibility to make sure everyone is okay. And in this case, we can make sure that people have a better chance if everyone receives the vaccine, regardless of age.
I would probably just add to that, you know, the statement that younger people in Barbados aren't dying from the disease should probably add yet to the end of that. The reality is, in my experience caring for hundreds of COVID patients over the last year, without a doubt, there were several patients of mine who were younger in their 20s who have ended up on ventilators. Some of them have died, right? There's this paradox that occurs in this younger population that we say are theoretically or not supposed to be as susceptible to severe disease as older individuals. And the fact that we've not seen a lot of death in younger individuals is oftentimes used as a reason for not getting the vaccine. Well, the reality is younger individuals are also the ones who are less likely to engage with the healthcare system, right? And so there's this paradox that exists where even though on a global scale, younger people generally don't have severe disease, at an individual level, if you're less likely to have gone to the doctor, the reality is you may not know what underlying medical conditions you potentially have, right? So you may not know what your personal susceptibility is to COVID-19. And I think it's unwise to simply look at mass statistics and try to extrapolate your personal risk with respect to COVID-19 and use that as justification for not getting the vaccine.
Just to add to that.
I recognize Dr. Stewart, and then I have two questions coming from persons who have their hands raised in the forum. I'll take Dr. Stewart's contribution, then I'll take Vernell Nichols, followed by Ricardo Salmon.
It's just a comment to add to Mark's excellent statement that there are individual risk calculators out there. There's the Oxford COVID-19 individual risk calculator. You can Google that. There's also one, I believe, in Harvard as well, but it does demand that you know your personal medical history to calculate your individual risk.
Thank you. Vernell?
Thank you, Mr. Yewood. The question is for any of the doctors. So I keep hearing persons saying that, you know, they're mostly talking about persons who have allergies to not take the vaccine, but the focus is on persons who have underlying conditions. And I have an underlying medical condition. I have a lung disease, chronic. And sometimes I'm uncertain as to what decision to make. So I want to know if there are any other critical underlying conditions that the doctors would discourage persons from taking the vaccine, or if it is only if you have an allergy. Thank you.
So the information available on AstraZeneca's website is very clear on this issue. And since this is the vaccine available in Barbados, I want to redirect individuals to the information that is publicly available on it. I do want to just comment though and state that individuals with underlying conditions are more susceptible to severe disease. So again, drawing from the information available on AstraZeneca, there are, and even with the two vaccines available in the United States, there were no contraindications listed in terms of medical conditions. Again, referring to other comments made, if you have questions, you need to have those conversations with your medical professionals who know your health data and can help you walk through that information.
Okay, thank you very much. Ricardo Salmon?
I would add to that if a person has a chronic disease like diabetes, if a person has any other autoimmune or immunosuppressive, if you had like a transplant or whatever this case like that, those patients could be at risk of getting very severe disease from COVID. And as a consequence, they're the very persons that should be getting the vaccine. When you have COVID, it does not only lead to lung disease. COVID is a systemic infection. It can also cause anything from strokes to heart attacks to arthritis. COVID, it just runs rampant through your entire body. So you need to make sure you get protected not only against a pulmonary syndrome, but against all the other potential complications that happen from that disorder. So it is imperative that when you have a complicated issue, that you be on the front line to get that vaccine, unless, as was said before, you're allergic to some component of the vaccine. Other than that, I personally, I have diabetes and I am going to get my COVID vaccine.
Question: where do you get
A few points here.
The components of the vaccine? In our case, the AstraZeneca, so that persons could make that comparison. Could you answer that also, Dr. Edwards, as you speak?
Okay, so I'll answer that as well, but just a few points here to make. Now, yes, Dr. Carrington pointed out the head persons that we would like to have the vaccine are the ones with the underlying conditions. And make no mistake, in Barbados, we have a large at-risk population, okay? We have a very large diabetic population, and about twice that are already hypertensive, even if they're unaware of that. So you're going to be speaking about persons in their 40s, some with one or two of these conditions in Barbados, many still undiagnosed at this point. So we have been fortunate so far that there's not overwhelming community spread. But make no mistake, in the event that there is, you will start to see more deaths, really, even in the younger age group, because you have the underlying diabetes and you have the hypertension that is so prevalent. So because we've gone this good so far, does not mean we should underestimate the potential danger from COVID-19 in Barbados, even among our younger populations, okay? We have many diabetics in their 40s, all right, some even in their 30s. So yes, those are the key persons that we would like to get the vaccine to, all right? Now, in terms of the questions of the particular components of the vaccine, unless you are allergic to any particular component that you know of, this is a new product to Barbados. So you're going to get your first dose of the vaccine, and you'll see what happens at that point. But so far, of course, this is one of the safest vaccines that we have available for COVID-19 in terms of the safety data from the clinical trials. So far in Barbados, we've gone well. We've seen no major allergic reactions at this point in our campaign as well.
And we thank God for that, and we'll hope and pray that folk would take an objective position and weigh the information which they get through this forum and others, compare the scientific data with other views being expressed, and then ultimately make decision for yourself. I mean, but I could tell you, I mean, when sickness really comes your way, you really don't want to be playing around with what people tell you to take. You want to deal with what the scientists and the doctors actually tell you, because that is proven at a given point of time. One question from Ricardo Selman before we go back to the submitted questions, please.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon and good evening. I think it's Kevin Casey. Good evening. Here, the vaccine of choice for Barbados is the AstraZeneca, and I imagine it is the one recommended by WHO, and it's the cheapest one they have on the market. And my understanding is that it has been tested on persons 55 years and under. I am wondering if, since it has been tested on those 55 and under, if it would be safe for those above 55 to have that vaccine in their arms.
Who would like to take that question? Although, well, I'm no doctor, but from the research that I've done, we noted that the control groups and used in the trials, they were a cross-section of individuals. And not necessarily those on 55 only, but the doctors could speak.
Okay, so the original clinical research with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, I guess persons would have noted the limited number of persons over 70 in that original research. But let's remember now that this vaccine is being deployed in mass campaigns. So you're looking at millions of persons now that would have received this vaccine globally, many of them over 70. So you have to give a real world context to it now. So remember, the vaccine was developed through different trials. So the safety aspect of the trials have gone well. Of course, they would have been of limited numbers, but the reason that these vaccines are out here is because there is a great benefit to taking the vaccine. Okay, you want to decrease mortality globally. So the risk-benefit ratio, the benefit of the vaccine far surpasses the risk of taking it. You want to save lives here. Now, so persons may have focused on the original trial data with the limited amount of persons over the age of 70 receiving this vaccine. But remember now, as the global mass vaccination campaigns begin, the usual pattern is that once a country or a state has vaccinated their essential workers, their healthcare workers, etc., they begin to go perhaps to a age cohort system, and they start vaccinating their most elderly population, and then go to the younger age groups. So millions of persons globally would have received this vaccine, many over the age of 70, and we've not noted any issues really with safety. And this also would apply here to Barbados. Okay, so we've seen no major incidents of adverse effects in our population over 70. So that should not be a concern. The vaccine is safe for all age groups once you're above the age of 18 years of age, and that is the World Health Organization recommendation as well.
A question that could be added to that, I suffered Bell's palsy some years ago. I heard that is one of the side effects of the vaccine. Would it be wise for me to take the vaccine?
So the studies that were done, there were some reports of Bell's palsy with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. But after it was evaluated by the Centers for Disease Control, the incidence of Bell's palsy was not found to be higher than in the general population. And so at this time, there does not appear to be an association between Bell's palsy and either of the two approved American vaccines. For the vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, there were no reported cases of Bell's palsy. And so Bell's palsy is not a concern for the vaccine that's currently available in Barbados.
And to add to that, the advice is even if you had Bell's palsy in the past, that you should still go ahead and get the vaccine. Again, as Mark said, it's the same as the background population, so there should be there's no direct causality established at present.
So what are some of the actual side effects one can experience from taking the vaccine?
Okay, so there are things that we expect to occur once you've had the vaccine. So most persons will have some pain at the site of injection, and that's with any vaccine. You've given the jab to a person, okay? Also expect that you may have some fever as well. You may have some muscle ache, some joint pain, but again, these are expected effects and these are manageable, okay? In the event that you do experience any of these particular symptoms, some paracetamol will be good enough to relieve that. We found from a practical aspect here, really after the first day was, I guess, more prominent for these things, but after that, we've noted no significant issues at all post-vaccination.
That is good news. That is very good news.
I should say that's a similar phenomena in the United States also, that there are not a lot of major side effects. The majority of side effects are just minimal, as was outlined just now. And I think we could expect that with, as we continue.
Good afternoon. If I can just make a quick point, I did have the vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca, and my husband had the vaccine around the same time, just like 2 minutes ahead of me. He had absolutely no side effects, but I am much younger than him, and I had quite a few side effects. I actually started out with some runny nose, and this was about 4 or 5 hours after. And then I also developed sore throat and a cough. And then into the night, I had a severe headache. Then I had chills and I had dizziness. So I pretty much had almost all the side effects, but by 36 hours, everything pretty much cleared up and I was back to normal. But just to show how people vary, because he had absolutely nothing and I had almost everything. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you for that. It was also shown in the studies that the younger age group had more potential side effects than the older age groups. So the Oxford AstraZeneca actually looked at 240 individuals above the age of 70. The majority of the population was between the ages of 30 and 55, let's say, and it was the younger group who had the more side effects compared to the older group. So, your experience is valid, and, it does reflect what we know may happen in the younger age groups.
I know we haven't reached the situation of the second dose in Barbados as yet, but are there side effects which are experienced with the second dose compared to the first? And if so, do these side effects tend to be more intense than those experienced after the initial dose?
The answer to that question is yes. There are a greater number of individuals who may experience more intense symptoms. The easiest way to sort of conceptualize why that may occur is, the initial vaccine is sort of seen as like a primer to the immune system. And so when you receive the second dose of the vaccine, the body has already developed a limited immune response to the spike proteins that Dr. Carrington mentioned previously. And as a consequence of that, very often the symptoms that we experience in a disease is a reaction to the body's reaction to the infection itself. And so I think for most people, or for many people, they may, particularly if you had reactions to the initial dose, you may potentially have more intense symptoms after the second dose. But even those tend to be self-limited and typically last less than 24 hours as well.
And I think Barbados is benefiting from all the studies that are going on, because they are now even delaying the second dose from the original recommendation, which will probably help Barbadians even more. So, well, hopefully help them even more. So I think that Dr. Edwards is going on the right track.
Okay. Just to add some balance to the discussion and also probably bring some conclusion to discussion which we had, the natural herbs versus COVID, there's a comment in the chat which I would like to read. There's a big difference between using a herb or nutrient to help boost or support the immune system and using a herb to treat the COVID virus. There's no natural immunity for the COVID-19 virus. Using a herb will not cause the body to develop natural immunity to the virus. Herbs are good, but they will not treat the COVID-19 virus. I hope that brings some balance, some clarity, and hopefully conclusion to that discussion.
Yeah, I say amen to that. I know we're not in church, but I'm saying amen. However, as we know, COVID-19 is a novel virus. It's brand new. It's like you're walking down the street and you see somebody that you've never seen before. You definitely can't recognize that person. You don't know anything about that person. And that's the same thing that the body sees when a novel virus comes in. So the body now has to create some kind of immune response to try to fight this thing off. And different people have different levels of immunity and are immune competence. And as a consequence, they're able to fight off viruses better than others. So we can't really jump to the conclusion, as Dr. Bradshaw said, that these things are causative. And we can't establish causation by any treatment that has not been tested, as Sherry had said earlier before.
Okay, continuing with the science. There's word going around that the vaccine could affect or change your DNA, which is located in the nucleus of the cell. Does the vaccine reach this area, or does it depend on who is given it or how it is given?
If nobody wants to start on this one, I'll start. Normally, when an injection is given, it goes into the muscle in a person's body. Obviously, nobody knows exactly where the needle tip is going to end, but it's usually more than likely going to be, some cells are obviously going to get damaged, and it's going to go into interstitial space mostly. From the interstitial spaces in that cellular tissue, the local cells there are called myocytes. They're muscle cells, and the vaccine that is given, basically, that nanoparticle compound that has the virus housed in it is going to go into the cytoplasm of the cell, and the mRNA is replicated there. Now, there's some viruses that have that particular part of it in the DNA, in a DNA structure. Yes, those viruses may cross over into the nucleus, get the mRNA formed, but the mRNA now comes back to the cytoplasm, so it can be read by the translators, we call them ribosomes, that are located there to help get those protein particles that we want to create immunity against. So that is how the process basically works. I hope that satisfies the answer. Others could add to that answer.
Yeah, I would say that the natural COVID is an RNA virus. It's a 5' RNA virus, meaning that even in the natural COVID itself, it doesn't go into the nucleus. It's translated straight away once it gets into the cell in the cytoplasm, doesn't go into the nucleus. So it's an RNA virus. That's the first thing. The virus, the vaccine, from the Oxford vaccine that you're receiving in Barbados, so that we have in Barbados, that is the RNA from the actual virus. It's not necessarily man-made or manufactured like the Pfizer ones or the BioNTech or the Moderna. It's a separate process where it was actually produced by using cells to actually get the actual RNA. So in short, when the vaccine is given, everything that Dr. Carrington said, the adenovirus is unveiled in the cytoplasm. As the RNA comes out, it's transcribed by the ribosome, not approaching the nucleus.
Okay, I'm going to switch tones just for a bit. and that's a question on the moral issues. And I'll pose this to Pastor Grenville Hines. Are there any moral issues with taking the vaccine, saying that it's made from embryos and other things of that sort?
Well, before I respond to that question, you have learned doctors here who can indicate to you, first of all, if such substances are used in a particular vaccine. And if they can clear that up, then I can speak to it in terms of the moral issues. All right? For us as a church, for those of the Christian persuasion, the whole issue of vaccine is one of choice. And also there's the other side of the coin which speaks to one's responsibility to your fellow man. And the discussions thus far have indicated to us that there's a high probability of transmission. Person can have the disease and don't know, but if they are vaccinated, as the case might be, it reduces the possibility of transmission. So in terms of moral issues, I would see it as personal responsibilities to one another in terms of whether you should vaccinate or not. But that does not preclude one's individual choice. So for me, the moral issue would be one of whether or not you see it as a matter of helping your fellow man in terms of safeguarding others from the transmission of the disease.
Okay. Any comments by the doctors in terms of the makeup of the vaccine?
If I just from that point of view, I think some people think that people actually go around killing. Well, I shouldn't say killing, but taking fetal tissues from abortive individuals so that they can make this vaccine. That is absolutely not true. In every I guess well-developed lab in the, well, I should say many well-developed labs in the world, we have certain cell lines that are available to us. These are cell lines that people have donated. Some people, obviously, in the caption of Helga cells, they took the lady's cancer cells and let them keep on growing without her permission. But normally, we have cell lines that are cultured in labs, and from those cell lines we can now use them to do various experiments, and many experiments are done with various cell lines that we have. You can harvest cell lines from umbilical cords, from fetal tissues, from whatever, and you could allow those cell lines to grow so that you can do appropriate experiments with. But nobody goes around harvesting the fetuses from young women who have aborted their babies or older women who have aborted their babies to try to generate vaccines to make the COVID or any other vaccine for that purpose. So please don't make that assumption.
And just to be very clear, there are no fetal cells in any of these vaccines, right? They're at all. I don't know where that misconception, misnomer piece of information came from, but fetal cells are not used in the vaccine itself.
Okay, I have a question. Well, I'll ask it as it was presented. Which is better, the mRNA vaccine or the straight DNA, as in the case of the Oxford AstraZeneca? How do they affect the body? Do they affect the body differently? The mRNA vaccine versus the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Okay, so you have to appreciate the process that is going on here. All right, now these vaccines would have, I guess, as their base some genetic material, but the end result is that the process occurs predominantly in the cytoplasm, where you would have that messenger RNA translated into the spike protein, which will form the basis of the antibody response against COVID-19. So the vaccines have taken, I guess, two different two slightly different approaches, but the end result is the same. At the end of the day, you have the messenger RNA, which is translated into the spike protein, which will be used to form the basis of the antibody response for both types of these vaccines, okay? The initial process might be slightly different, but the concluding steps are quite similar for these vaccines. So it is not that you have two completely different processes ongoing here. At the end of the day, you have the body creating from genetic material a spike protein, which will form the basis of the antibody response to COVID-19. So you're just going to make that part of the coronavirus that causes the issue. So the spike protein is involved in the pathogenesis of the process. So once you can develop the antibodies to that, you can sort of target the coronavirus from that aspect. You're not making the entire virus, of course, but again, it's just how the initial steps would have occurred with the two broad vaccine products. But the end result is quite similar, so they shouldn't be viewed as two completely different systems as an end result.
As Kevin said before, when after the virus comes in and is transcribed and we make the proteins, those spike proteins, then obviously the immune response is generated. Unfortunately, we don't have any long-term data yet as to how this if it could cause any other effects. So far, as we've been watching, nothing has happened except for the minor side effects that people develop. So as time goes by, and I think Mark brought this up quite clearly before also, as time goes by, we just have to monitor, watch, and see what things can develop. But we should not hold back on proceeding with treatment, I should say treatment with immunization. At this time, we have lots of evidence that the efficacy is good, that no severe side effects are happening, and therefore that's why we continue.
So I feel called to give this comment in this way. And I think Dr. Carrington had an example earlier where he talked about the COVID virus being novel and our body's never seeing it before, right? So let's take everything we've been saying and distill it down to a very practical real world example. You are in Bridgetown, all right? You're a celebrity of some sort and you have bodyguards with you. For some reason, somebody in a yellow coat, yellow shirt comes up and punches you in the face. You weren't expecting it, they just do it, right? So your bodyguards then have to try to scuffle to handle this person who decided to come and punch you in the face for no reason. So with the vaccine process, what the vaccine is doing is essentially prepping your bodyguards for that person who may come and assault you. So, regardless of the mechanism chosen, the package, the viral package in the AstraZeneca or the mRNA package, our bodies are being primed to recognize something that could hurt us and allow our bodyguards to spring into action. So hopefully that's a practical example that makes people understand what is happening.
I'd like to ask another question that came in through YouTube. I think we might have touched on this briefly earlier. If we have contracted and recovered from COVID-19, would it still be necessary for me to be vaccinated? Did you get the question, panelists? If I have contracted and recovered from COVID-19, would it still be necessary for me to be vaccinated?
You're correct that we addressed that earlier. The answer is yes, eventually would need to be. The current recommended period is about 90 days after the initial diagnosis was made. But again, this is one of those things that you would really need to you would need to decide with your provider, because there are other considerations beyond the recommendation. The recommendation isn't a rule. That may play a role in when that vaccination actually occurs.
And I'd like to add to that also. Basically, if you got vaccinated against a particular strain, and then another strain comes out which may not be sensitive to the vaccine, then you could be required to get vaccinated again. And even in those people whose immune responses are not as good as they could be, as Mark had said earlier, obviously booster vaccines may be needed in the future. We don't know that for sure yet. I get my tetanus every 10 years because I know that I am at risk. One of my family members died from tetanus toxicity some years ago. She developed lockjaw at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Nobody could do anything for her, and she died. I don't want that to happen to me. So I get my tetanus every 10 years, basically. So we don't know what may happen in the future. So all we got to do is roll with the science for the time being, and then use the appropriate vaccinations as may be necessary.
General question. Is God in development of the vaccines, or is it all man inspired?
I guess as a pastor in the midst, I need to respond to this in this way. The wisdom God has given to man to develop means by which he can protect himself is the same wisdom that man uses to develop vaccines. Now, to sit and seek to question the motive of the vaccine makers is another matter altogether, which I will not get into. But suffice it to say, God has a part to play in all welfare. And the reality is God has endowed man with the wisdom to practice medicine, in this case with the doctors and so on, to use methods or therapies which are intended to make us better if we become ill. All right? So God, the God we serve, the God I know, is not a distant God. He hasn't just made us and left us, but he has given us the wisdom as human beings as to how we can proceed in terms of safeguarding our lives and so on. So medicine or science plays a part in that. So here again, in terms of the motive for people creating vaccines, it's another matter altogether. But I think we can safely say that for the most part, vaccines are created to help us to fight disease.
Since I have a theology degree also, I'm going to weigh in on this. And I'm definitely going to say God is in the making of vaccines. I'll be very definite about it. It is true that human beings sometimes are greedy, and we like to capitalize on things in this life. However, in the making of the COVID vaccine this time around, as Mark said, Dr. Mark said before, this is not something that was done for a profit-making thing per se, because the majority of the monies were given up front by multiple governments. In the Chinese sector, it was developed without any efforts to make any money. In Cuba, it's being developed without efforts to make any money. In the United States, the government pays for all the vaccine. Nobody has to pay anything out of their own pocket for vaccine. So this is not an effort that is being mitigated by greed from, quote, big pharma, as some people like to call it. This particular effort is because even the people who operate big pharma, they are in danger of contracting COVID-19 and dying themselves. So this is not something that people are doing for this. The world is operating at a totally different level here with this pandemic. This is a deadly pandemic. I know in Barbados, you guys may not see it as much as us living in the United States, where, as Dr. Sherry said already, almost 500,000 people have died, and so many other people are getting infected. So many states have had to close down. The economy has tanked in some areas. We have it really bad up here in the United States. But the mechanism between creating the vaccine is not for people to make a lot of money.
All right. Can persons who use an EpiPen, I think there's a medical term, take the COVID vaccine? Doctors?
So that would be a yes.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us what is an EpiPen?
Just an EpiPen contains a medicine called adrenaline or epinephrine, depends which side of the spectrum you're on, American or the European side. but it's used for severe allergies, whether it's a bee sting, whether it's a nut allergy, whatever have you. So a person that has an EpiPen, we already know has severe allergies. So we're going to monitor them again for an extended period post-vaccination. So if other persons get 15 minutes, they will get 30 minutes, and we'll monitor the process and make sure all goes well. But yes, they're still to get the vaccine.
Okay, and quickly add to that, can persons who are allergic to the Advil and that family of medicines take the vaccine as well?
So yes, unless you're allergic to the particular vaccine that we are giving or any component of it, yes, they can have the vaccine and they will receive an extended monitoring period post-vaccination.
Okay. One related question, I think we touched on this earlier, but it still came back in the chat, so reinforcement will be good. What other over-the-counter medicines or products could be used to alleviate the side effects of the vaccine, and what should be the dosage? And in particular, can you take the paracetamol before or after the vaccine?
Okay, so we're in the Barbadian context, so I'll add a few points here. Now paracetamol, of course, would be the safest option for us for these side effects in Barbados. Remember that dengue fever is endemic here. If you take non-steroidals and you happen to have dengue fever, you're at risk of a more severe course, all right? But the global standard, however, would be paracetamol for these particular side effects after the vaccine, in particular the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So if a person is not allergic to paracetamol, that of course would be the go-to product for most persons. And that's what we're going to encourage first of all, as opposed to Advil.
Thank you. A follow-up
Good
question.
afternoon. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please, Ms. Herbert.
Yes, please. Okay. And refer to the vaccine. Saying that the vaccine goes into the muscles. I have a muscle problem, a condition called myasthenia gravis. Can I use the vaccine?
So the answer to that is yes. You could use the
Yes.
vaccine with myasthenia gravis. The reason you have, well, the mechanism behind myasthenia gravis is not going to be complicated or compromised by taking the vaccine. And since you may be at one of those people who could probably be at risk of getting really sick if you got COVID, then I definitely would recommend that you take the vaccine also.
It's a weakness in the muscles.
I would want to echo Dr. Carrington's recommendation there. So inducible weakness in the muscles with myasthenia gravis. So you are particularly at risk for having severe respiratory failure if you were to contract COVID. And so you would be considered very high risk and probably should be in, a group of people that would be receiving that vaccine, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
One quick question. What about pregnant women? The word is that no tests were done with pregnant women. Should pregnant women take the vaccine?
This is one of those areas of personal choice, and I can speak from the perspective of what's been happening here in the United States. Thousands of pregnant women have received the vaccine to date, breastfeeding women, et cetera, because of their personal choice. So yes, the vaccine was not studied in that group, but what we do know from COVID is that, like we've been stressing all along, COVID is not easy. And for those in my family who know me well, I say this often, COVID does what COVID does. And COVID changes what COVID is going to do because it's Sunday, right? So, in terms of protecting oneself, we know that COVID can cause some, increase the risk of miscarriage and cause some change pregnancy outcomes. So individuals are choosing, based on the risk of COVID, to receive the vaccine, even though it has not been studied in pregnancy, because they see it as important to protect themselves and their unborn child.
Just to add to that as well, there are several studies, case series really, so not many, again, of ladies who happen to be pregnant and happen to get COVID, and it was found that the antibodies that the mum produced was actually detected in the milk and in the child and was protective. So that's just another angle to think about as well.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming down to the last 15 minutes of this discussion. We've been going for 1 hour and 45 minutes just about now. At this stage, I'm going to take questions from folk in the chat. I recognize Christopher Nichols and then Rachel Bartlett. And just as a heads up, panelists, once we are coming down to the last 7 minutes, I'm going to give you all an opportunity to make a closing comment in terms of your views and how we should proceed. So we take the question from Chris.
Hi, thanks for the information thus far. It's been enlightening. So I've realized two streams of thought from a lot of people on the ground on the whole COVID issue. One is, and I see quite a bit of it here, people feel that God has provided us with all the healing stuff that we need in nature, and that going with the medicine, with the chemical medicine, is going against what God's requirements are. Many religious people, and since we're doing this through a church, are pushing that idea. So I wonder if you can speak to that. And secondly, there are many videos going all over the place where the anti-vax people are presenting information that to many persons seem credible. And lots of people are making their decisions based on those videos rather than listening to people like you with MD behind your names. Can you comment on those two things, please?
Thank you, Chris. To the panel.
Yeah, I would say that this is a really good question because it's something that we all have to face. You know, it may show itself as vaccine hesitancy. You know, trying to get all the information. You know, we acknowledge that again that there's no long-term data, and in medicine we get a surety from long-term data and comfort. And you know, we don't know you know, everything about things yet, and that's why we're continuing to monitor things. And you know, as Sherry said, Dr. Makumbe said, you know, COVID does what COVID does. So what that means is, in this current state of the pandemic, with many people dying and passing away from this disease, we know that it is more severe than flu. It's not flu. It's, you know, 3%, you know, death rate, and that increases based on your personal risk. And so it shouldn't necessarily be thought of as that. And you know, the messaging from anti-vaxxers and does it conflict with God? I would say again, if we come that we're all logical people and we all have a decision to make before us, as Pastor said, each thing is a personal choice. But in making that choice, the advice would be to make an informed choice. And the studies done in parallel, and as Dr. Edwards said, the real world experience of millions upon millions being vaccinated of all races gives assurance, you know, as we go through things. And I would say that, you know, vaccination is a prevention. And I would also encourage, you know, God's natural remedies, you know, sunlight, fresh air, exercise, water, sleep. That also encourages, you know, your immune system to be at its optimal. You know, we say this is the most recent pandemic since 1918, and in the UK, in London, the Jews did very well, and people thought at that time, because the Jews were practicing the health laws, that because they were affected less, they had something to do with the spread. But it doesn't mean that, you know, some people weren't lost from that population either. And so I think it's a combination. I try to, you know, I'm a vegan. I try to do my exercise, my lifestyle changes, but the fact is I'm in a high risk environment, and, you know, I've taken the vaccine to protect both myself and others, to give that extra protection. And I would say that, you know, if there's doubts, if there's, you know, different information with the anti-vaxxers, you know, seek evidence and answer for the actual, you know, written, you know, evidence. And I would say lifestyle, and I've seen it in the chat as well about, you know, leaves and herbs are for the healing of the nations, and that's God's message for us from the very beginning. You know, I would say yes, take those things, you know, eat those things, live the New Start lifestyle. You know, but in addition to that, as this is a preventative measure and it's not a treatment per se, it's priming the body to actually fight off the disease. Everything that we're doing is maximizing health and prevention, and that's how I see those things, and that's where I'll stop.
I just want to add, when it in terms of the discussion, I think to draw from Dr. Stewart's point is that I think too often Christians in general, and I'm going to get very specific here because Seventh-day Adventist Christians as well, tend to pull out all the heroic efforts when the ship has already sailed. Right? So we often hear in the setting of someone having cancer or other terminal diseases that's when we want to talk natural and holistic. You know, to Dr. Stewart's point, we need to live this. We need to live fruits and vegetables. We need to live exercise. We need to live, you know, adequate sleep, rest, hydration. Those are things that we need to be doing on a daily basis. So I really have a very, very challenging time, and this is going to be my own personal struggle here, getting on the boat with individuals who don't want to do those things until it's too late. We have the information available. We are called to be personally responsible and do our best to optimize our health. So it's not the time to pivot when we've had a lifestyle of things that were detrimental to us, all of a sudden, you know, relying on carrot juice and thyme. That's not the time. Like live your best when you can. And I think that God will judge us for that if we don't. We have a responsibility to ourselves, to our families, to live our best optimal health while we are still in our youth, instead of waiting until things are too late to try some of these other things.
All right, I'm going to pose two final questions before we come to the wrap up. What are the characteristics of persons who are victims and or spreaders of the virus and are yet asymptomatic? Is there something special about that group of individuals?
They're asymptomatic. There are no other special characteristics. So I was going to say this in my closing comments, but my son had COVID, and he has recovered. And he was pretty much asymptomatic during the whole time, and there was no other special characteristics. We just locked him in a hotel for 2 weeks until he got back negative, and this COVID test came back negative, and that was it, you know. But there's no other you know, pressing characteristics that you're going to see. It is true that they may be, some of them may be immunocompromised. We saw in some studies that vitamin D deficiency was characteristic of some people who had severe infections. So there may be a vitamin D deficiency, but that's not something that you can see. You got to get tested for that. So from a observational point of view, you're not going to see something peculiar about that patient or that person when that person shows up. I thought you said you were also going to recognize Rachel, unless she doesn't want to ask a question anymore.
Sorry, thanks for reminding me. Rachel and Bartlett, please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask quickly, you were talking about COVID and how our body's immune response is probably not as good as it should. I'm understanding it correctly, because there is the need for you to still be vaccinated if you, although you may have had COVID previously. So along those lines, based on my small amount of knowledge with regards to the immune system, apart from us making antibodies to the virus, doesn't our body also remember the virus for future reference? In which case, if we encounter the virus again, we should mount an immune response. People are saying that the antibody level drops after a certain amount of time, but doesn't that happen with all viral infections? But if you encounter it later on, that because the body remembers it, that antibody response can be raised up again. What's the difference with COVID? Even if is it that you catch a different strain and that's why you need to be inoculated for it, even though you had it previously? What's the difference with that versus the flu, where you get a different vaccine every year because you have different strains every year? What's the difference between that and the COVID? Hope I'm not confusing.
Well, I hear many questions wrapped up in there, but
Could I ask a question here? Could I ask a question here?
No, let's get an answer to this question first, and then I'll take you, Vera.
Okay.
Okay. So just to respond to the question, all right. Yes, there's a memory component of the immune response. Now, so if you've been vaccinated or you've had previous natural infection with COVID-19, and your body recognizes a similar enemy again, you're going to get a more exaggerated response to that enemy, meaning that there are certain cells of the immune system that will remember what the enemy would have looked like, and then you would have a mobilization of additional antibody-making cells or whatnot to counter the enemy if you see it again. So yes, you would have been exposed if you had a natural infection or if you've had the vaccine. So yes, while the antibody levels may dip over time, there are also memory cells that will remember what they look like. So antibodies can be made again. All right. So there is a component of the body that if you're exposed to that particular enemy again, you can counter it by making more antibody making cells and thus more antibodies to have a more effective and a more timely response.
For anyone who has just one question to the panel. We are being asked to extend by another 15 minutes to accommodate additional questions. Are you available to continue until 3:15 Barbados time?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to add to that point, Dr. Edwards explained that really well. I think the follow-up question that you were going to ask is why then, I think you said the answer in your question, whereas, even with vaccines, there's potential because the virus is changing so quickly, it will escape. So what that means is it will look different again to the body if a new strain of COVID comes to that extent. So at the moment, a virus normally goes through, a few changes, like, 3 to 4 changes or so randomly. But COVID seems to be going through many changes very, very quickly. And so there are several variants out there as well, but there are 3 variants of concern. And, we don't know if in the future other variants will come out that would potentially change the spike protein so much that your body would no longer recognize a spike protein. So these things will be monitored. These, new vaccines will possibly be developed to counter them. So that's why really it's down to the enemy, how quickly it's changing.
Thank you.
All right, now can I ask the question now?
Vera, yes, please.
Yes, I have heard everything else, but I haven't heard anything said about lupus persons with heart conditions. People who have these conditions, any answer to the COVID with them and the injections?
Lupus and heart disease are also regarded as chronic diseases. They fall in the same category as like the diabetes and high blood pressure, stuff that like Dr. Edwards mentioned earlier. And all those chronic diseases will, put you at risk, and therefore we encourage vaccinations with those kinds of diseases. So those all fall into that very same category. When we say chronic diseases, that lumps all of those diseases together, basically.
Thank you very much. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Thanks for the answer. Question. I'm with you. Why are we doing mass vaccinations on persons who have recovered and were also asymptomatic without comparative studies that show the potency of antibodies produced from exposure to the wild virus versus the vaccine type? This is a technical question. I repeat, why are we doing mass vaccinations on persons who have recovered and were asymptomatic without comparative studies that show the potency of antibodies produced from exposure to the wild virus versus the vaccine type?
I'll start. Because this is an emergency situation, because we want to protect the community, because we want to protect ourselves from future infections, because we want to reduce the possibility of variants being formed, because the more people who get infected, the more the probability that variants will develop, because we want to reduce the economic impact that this virus has had on our countries. There are lots of reasons, and those are just some of on tip of the table, tip of the iceberg, that make us go ahead and do massive vaccinations, because we want to reduce these probabilities.
I just want to add briefly that we've also seen, the evidence regarding individuals who previously had COVID influence our recommendations for how the person quarantines or not after they get COVID. So currently the recommendation is an individual who gets COVID and is re-exposed within 3 months would not need to quarantine again. And that is also based on science. So the data will change as time goes on. We anticipate that what is 3 months now could be extended out further when we look at the information, but the current information available suggests to us that 3 months is the window of protection. And we also see that same recommendation with the 2 vaccines here in the United States, for example, that are available. The recommendation being 3 months after vaccine or COVID, you can basically live your life, right? You interact per the safety protocols, but you would not have to re-quarantine in that 3-month period.
I have a question. This person wants to be sure that he or she is fully covered and asks, can you take 2 vaccines in close proximity?
So just to clarify, I assume the question is based on 2 vaccines of a different type?
I assume, but it doesn't state, so I would not make the assumption.
Okay.
From both areas.
The current recommendations that I am most of it familiar with state that you should not receive another vaccine within 14 days of the COVID vaccine. So I'll let the other panelists weigh in if they have other information.
Yeah, so I would say that the advice is for the Oxford vaccine 4 to 12 weeks after the first dose. You're watching CBC. So 4 to 12 weeks after the first dose is when it's recommended to take the Oxford vaccine. Studies have shown, looking at the comparing when the second dose was given, the efficacy produced, and there's, as I think Dr. Carrington suggested in the answer earlier, that the longer potentially the delay between the 6 to 12 week period versus the 4 to 6 week period, it seems to be more efficacious on the amount of response that is given or made to the vaccine. In addition to that, the UK are now beginning studies looking at if 2 different vaccine types can be given. But at the moment, it's recommended that the one that you get for your first shot, you also get that at the recommended time point for your second shot. So that's currently, and just a comment on the previous question about the antibody efficacy. Again, studies are going on at the moment measuring persons who've been infected, their antibody levels and how long they last. As Sherry says, 3 months at the moment is quite sound. But we also know from convalescent serum with antibodies that even with individuals that were severe, you have different levels of protection even within convalescent serum. So it doesn't guarantee that even if you had an infection that your immune system has produced, antibodies that are very efficacious. So, there's batch testing from patients who recovered, given convalescent serum, and the best of those are then taken to potentially be used for treatments for patients who may be immunocompromised or, that need that extra boost. But you find that in those batch testing that not everyone who's had the virus, even potentially severely, have produced, very useful antibody sera. So that's also something to comment on there.
Amen. And I would also like to add that if I remember my basic immunology reasonably well, that it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for the IgG antibody levels to rise significantly. And if taking a shot quicker than that is not really going to let us know what the true response is. It's better to wait, see what the response is, and then get the booster subsequently. But to take 2 shots back to back is not really going to help us. We don't have any evidence that it helps us that much that quickly.
Okay, I know we don't have a lawyer on the panel, but there might be one in the audience. This question: can a healthcare worker who refused to take the COVID-19 vaccine be dismissed by his or her employer? And if so, what legal recourse does he or she have to ensure their constitutional rights are not being infringed?
Vince, before the panel answer that question, I put that question to the Attorney General of Barbados, Mr. Dan Marshall, and he has told me that that question will be answered nationally by the Minister of Labour. I want to jump in on it, go back to the Attorney General. I submit the question to him, and he said the Minister of Labour will answer that question nationally in one of their press conferences.
Okay, well, with that, we'll table that question and wait for the answer from the authorities. But it is relevant. I assume it would apply to any other work, as a matter of fact, not only healthcare workers.
Can I give some evidence from history? In, again, 1918, when the outbreak was in the UK, or the world really, as a pandemic at that time, there was a movement, I think in around the 60s or something in the UK, to make vaccines mandatory by law. And what they found in that period was actually a negative effect on uptake, because it then crosses into liberty of conscience, as you said, quite sticky places to reason between. And they found actually by trying to mandate, it actually, created resistance. And so in this country, in the UK, the government has steered away from that, from history and from evidences that we have seen locally, that by trying to enforce, sometimes you can actually create a greater pushback.
Okay. One final question. Where are the studies that show that the vaccine stops the spread of the virus?
Yes, I know.
Where are the studies that One question, where are the studies that show that the vaccine stops the spread of the virus?
To the best of my knowledge, there are not many. I don't know of a study per se that identifies that directly. Mostly we've studied how the vaccine prevents severity of disease and how it sort of helps those who take it not to get sick, as it were. But in terms of a long-term study, remember the vaccine only came out a couple months ago. We don't have long-term studies on all these things. All these vaccines are out on an emergency basis. This is not something that is the usually calculated long-term studies that we do over many years before a vaccine comes out. And we have done this because of the challenge that we face with the disease. So I don't know if there is any long-term studies at this time on that particular topic yet, but we'll get there, as has been said over and over again during the course of the evening. Let's work with the science for the time being. But even though science is very good, it ain't always perfect at the time you need it. But we'll get there.
Thank you. One final question before I invite the final comments from the panelists. So the question reads, I was not on in the beginning, and I'm not sure if this came up. What if you have HIV and is taking medication and is currently undetectable? Will the vaccine affect my CD4 count?
So I'll just jump in there. Again, a previous comment on the previous question. I think the Oxford vaccine showed, about 66% reduction in transmission, but I'll have to find those studies for you. And I think the Pfizer said 70%, but I think that's where I've heard some papers report. I'll need to dig that out to prove that. In terms of the HIV, I think there was an interesting, testing issue in Australia, I think it was, where the vaccine caused false positive HIV testing. And for that reason, it was removed from the market. Apart from that, though, there should be no problem for patients who have a low CD4 count, is controlled with medication and undetectable, to then take the COVID vaccine. From my understanding, I think Dr. Edwards was also going to comment on that.
Okay, so in our context, a person with HIV will still be offered the vaccine. All right, we will offer it in conjunction with their consulting specialist, but of course it will still be offered at this point. And just to add to the previous comments, there's a real world experience with the vaccines as they're being rolled out. So you would see globally, for example, countries like Israel already have a significant decrease in hospitalization for their elderly population. They're using the Pfizer vaccine over there. They've also noted, at least preliminary data, that you have about a 0.015 infection rate if you had both doses of the Pfizer vaccine. So a very, very small infection rate from COVID-19 if you've not had it before and you've had both doses out there. But again, it's preliminary information, but it is welcoming news. So we'll see where it leads.
I would probably just want to add just one other thing with respect to patients who may be HIV positive as well. This again is one of those areas where consultation with your infectious disease specialist is tremendously important. By definition, persons who are HIV positive, particularly with low counts, have difficulty mounting immune responses. And so there's a question as to what effect, if any, they would potentially get from receiving the vaccine. Those are very specific questions to the individual, their counts, et cetera. that frankly only their infectious disease specialists could really answer and provide good recommendations for.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are quickly approaching the end of this rather interesting and educational session. And I am going to invite the panelists to make a closing comment, starting in reverse order. Dr. Mark Bradshaw, and Dr. Kevin Stewart, Dr. Selvin Carrington, Dr. Sherilyn McCoby, and we have the final word giving us the local perspective from Dr. Omar Edwards. Dr. Bradshaw?
Sure. So I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. My hope is that some of the answers provided here provides some clarity and makes it easier for individuals who are considering the vaccine to make a decision one way or another. My hope and desire, and the reason I participated, is that hopefully providing those clarifying questions would aid people signing up for the vaccine, frankly. One of the reasons I suppose I was invited to participate today, and one of the reasons I agreed to participate, is that over the past 10 years to a month, I've had a tremendous amount of experience, more than I would like, frankly, walking into rooms on a daily basis, taking care of dozens of patients with vaccines. And there are a couple points that I would like to bring home as we sort of conclude. The first one is a point that Dr. Makambe has been making over and over, and that is that the COVID virus does not discriminate, guys. It doesn't really care about what your sex is. It could care less about what your income is. Doesn't care if you're Christian or non-Christian, doesn't really care if you're a vegan or meat eater. Those things honestly don't make a significant difference with respect to the spread or one's vulnerability to COVID. The second point I would like to make, because we heard a lot of these questions coming up, is that healthy skepticism about a product that is new is understandable. I think it is healthy to be skeptical. But sometimes you can talk yourself out of a good thing. And I suspect that many of us may be in that scenario where we're looking for guarantees and nothing in life is guaranteed. And I would hate for us to make decisions because we can't get 100% guarantee about the efficacy or about what the future holds. No one knows. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I may not be here tomorrow. What we do know today is that there are countless hundreds of thousands, millions of people who've died from COVID vaccine, and the world as a whole has undertaken a Herculean effort to come up with something to try to mitigate and potentially stop stop this virus from spreading. I came today because I have had too many conversations with patients and their families when there was nothing I could do. I've had conversations with patients. I had a conversation just last week with a gentleman who told me he did not want to die, was begging me to not let him die. And when you're in a room taking care of patients who are dying, more importantly, know they're dying, sometimes the most compassionate thing that I could do for them is lie to them, right? Because there's no value in telling these patients that, we've reached the end of the road and there's nothing I can do. Sometimes that can accelerate their demise because of the anxiety that it brings on. And from personal experience, because I know that if COVID becomes rampant in Barbados, I can guarantee 100% of every family in Barbados will be touched by this, will be affected negatively by this. That's the reason I'm here today. There are some things that I probably will not agree. Some of us, the audience, may not agree on. But I can guarantee you that COVID is not a joke. And there's no grand conspiracy. And my hope is that the information provided today helps you guys make wise and informed decisions about your own health and about the collective health of Barbados.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bradshaw. Dr. Stewart?
Yeah, thanks again, Vincent, and everyone who invited us today to talk about these important issues. You know, what Dr. Bradshaw said was very powerful. I don't think that there's much for me to add. I would say, though, that the fact that you're here, the fact that you're listening, the fact that you're trying to get your questions answered shows that, you know, you're in potentially in the place you've either had the vaccine or you're making a choice. And, you know, for those who may be experiencing vaccine hesitancy, you know, get the information, look at your risk, look at those around you, because as we said in this, it's not just your individual risk, it's about the contacts you have in your life and how those patients or those persons may be affected. And, you know, if you have any underlying long-term health conditions, you know, it's advisable that you get the vaccine. And if you're young and healthy, as Dr. Makumbe said, if you don't have, you know, it's likely you have someone in your life that may be at risk. And with, you know, Barbados having non-communicable diseases as the top 4 killers, you know, in the country, it's not only for yourself, your family, but also for the island. I've had the vaccine. I've taken the vaccine because, you know, I'm 40, but we know Afro-Caribbeans, especially in this country, in the UK, most of the doctors and the nurses that have passed away are from a Black and ethnic minority background. We know that Black children, you know, are affected by polyinflammatory multisystemic syndrome. And this is usually from the age of 8 to 17. And on all those affected, 75% were Black. And so it's you know, there's inequalities. It favors, in this country anyway, you know, our people, you know, Afro-Caribbean people. And so knowing that, all of these things, I would advise to look at your situation, but, you know, think about getting the information before you make your individual choice. You know, the Bible says, I set before you life and death, you know, choose life. I would say this is a preventative step. It does not replace God in any way. Our trust and our life and our healing and our help still comes from God. And yes, remedies and you know, natural remedies are important, you know, but don't think that necessarily, you know, this is an extra step, you know, this is extra protection. And I would advise, you know, if you are significantly at risk, and even if you're not, but have people like that in your life, you know, to consider taking the vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Just as a heads up, after Dr. Makumbe makes her comment, I invite Pastor Hines to make a few comments, followed by a vote of thanks by Dr. Jonathan Lewis. So, Dr. Selwyn Carrington, your closing comments?
I think you missed Dr. Edwards there.
Dr. Edwards missed it.
Okay.
Dr. Edwards will be final in terms of the closing comments.
Okay. I grew up in Coffee Gully, St. Joseph, a place I love dearly. And my grandmother did not go to school. She had to stop school at age 9 to work on Blackman's plantation. And she instilled in all of us some very basic ethics that I think are quite smart and quite telling even to this day. I believe in my grandmother. My grandmother always would say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I believe that we should take every effort to proceed with prevention whenever possible. And that's my appeal to you this evening. Proceed with prevention. Do what's good for you. Do what's good for your community. Do what's good to bring glory to God. That's all I have to say, Vinny.
Thank you. Dr. Makumbe?
So I have several things to say. I'll try to be very brief. You know, I want to remind everyone that we make decisions in our everyday lives. We do that normally. And there's some decisions we make that we don't think twice about, right? We do our best daily. We brush our teeth to prevent cavities. We eat to give ourselves energy so we wouldn't fall out or faint, while we're waiting for the bus in the sun. We wear a seatbelt when we get into the car, and we don't second guess clicking the seatbelt when we sit down. Even though the seatbelt won't prevent you from the worst fatality in a car accident, we wear the seatbelt anyway, right? So vaccination is an extension of this. Vaccination is an extension of the decisions that you're already making in your daily lives, using the best information you have, and the ultimate goal is to protect yourself. So with that being said, it's important that we spread truth. Yeah, I was reminded of a quote recently that says, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. And I encourage everyone in this forum to be very careful and cautious about your role in either spreading lies or truth. What you spread on WhatsApp seems to go further than the information that the health officials are putting out. And I don't even live in Barbados, and I have access to all of the information that the health officials are putting out, and it's very clear. It's very clear, okay? So if you want to spread that and discuss it, I encourage you to do that, right? But use the information wisely, use the resources that you have very wisely. And I have also received the vaccine. So as of today, I am melanated, educated, and vaccinated, all right? Several months, about a month post-vaccination. And I have decided that COVID-19 is not what's going to end me, okay? I had a choice to do what I could to prevent myself from contracting severe disease, because I have other things to do with my life apart from COVID. So I don't want COVID in the equation. I have other things to do for my family, for society and humanity. And I encourage all of you to think about your purpose and your mission in the context of doing what you can to prevent COVID. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It was really an honor and a privilege to participate today.
Okay. All right. I'll take Dr. Omar Edwards, the final doctor on the panel, to give a message to Barbados in particular.
I'd like to thank the organizers, first of all, and the other distinguished panelists here this afternoon. Now, my main task is public health, okay? COVID-19 is a ruthless enemy. Now, when we first started to look at it from the Barbadian context, we expected significant fatalities, okay? I'm speaking of about 30,000 people dying in Barbados. We've seen 31 deaths to date, okay? But that's because we've had other systems in place. But again, COVID-19 is a ruthless enemy. If it gets away, you're going to start to see more deaths. Make no mistake about it. And then it starts to hit home. The vaccine that we offer is to protect Barbadians or long-term residents, is to protect you. Okay, we don't want to wait to be in that scenario. We know what happens in other countries. We appreciate the science, but I guess for the Barbadian public, it's not fully hit home as yet. We've had 31 deaths, but I mean, our initial planning for worst case scenario, we were looking at up to 30,000 deaths from COVID-19, all right? We don't want to get anywhere near that by any stretch of the imagination. So we would like you to look at the information, consider strongly the vaccines being offered, and comply with the public health and the medical advice. It helps us to protect you and to protect Barbados, okay? So just some final thoughts on that.
Thank you. Pastor Hines?
Okay, let me use this opportunity to share for the benefit of those who are online, who might be wondering what is the official position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So it's a very short statement. This was issued on March 2nd, 2015. This is the official statement of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as it relates to immunization. The Seventh-day Adventist Church places strong emphasis on health and well-being. The Adventist health emphasis is based on biblical revelation, the inspired writings of E.G. White, co-founder of the church, and on peer-reviewed scientific literature. As such, we encourage responsible immunization or vaccination and have no religious or faith-based reason not to encourage or adherents or members to responsibly participate in protective and preventative immunization programs. We value the health and safety of the population, which includes the maintenance of herd immunity. We are not the conscience of the individual church member and recognize individual choices. These are exercised by the individual. The choice not to be immunized is not and should not be seen as a dogma, not a doctrine of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Final disclaimer, the decision to be immunized or not is a choice of each individual and should be taken in consultation with one's healthcare provider. Personal research on the subject is also important. We ultimately rely on following biblical health practices and the spirit of prophecy, and following God's leading in our lives, which will bring us peace and assurance in our decision making. Finally, the church's approach to the whole pandemic is this, and that is why we have this program today, creating awareness that involves educating, public education, providing reassurance, and offering support. So it's on those grounds that we have decided as a church at Berea to host this very important public education program. And let me congratulate the panelists. Let me thank also on behalf of the Berea Seventh-day Adventist Church and by extension the East Caribbean Conference of Seventh-day Adventists for the efforts put forward by one of our lay members, Brother Jonathan Lewis, Dr. Jonathan Lewis, and others who have assisted at the church in putting together this program. And of course, our host, Brother Vincent Ewitt. God bless.
Thank you. And the parting words from Dr. Jonathan.
I would like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Carrington, Dr. McCombie, Dr. Stewart, Dr. Bradshaw, Dr. Edward, and Pastor Hines for the, Ms. Dr. Stewart, for the input that you are giving us this afternoon. It was really educational. It was to the point. I'm certain that all of us in our hearing have gathered something from this and could walk away to make better decisions. I also want to thank the Berea Church for sponsoring the panel discussion, as well as the input personally of Pastor Thorne and the East Caribbean Conference, and making sure that this discussion comes off. We know that you have learned something from it. I also want to shout out to all those out there who are in the audience. I know we had in Zoom well over 300 people, and I know that there was well over 200 also or more on the YouTube channel this afternoon. I hope this information will go further. I know that we were unable to answer all of your questions, but I hope that we touch on the more pivotal ones that would affect us in our daily lives. If you want more thought into the question of the COVID vaccine, I'm advising you to check in tomorrow with the University of the West Indies, debunking the myth of the COVID-19 vaccine. That's at 6:30 p.m. on YouTube tomorrow afternoon. So again, panelists, my audience, and Vince, thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing from you all sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And as the apostle said, I wish above all things that you will prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospereth. Let's use this information to help us in our decision making as we continue to trust God and do all that we can to secure our health by His help and His grace. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless all.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and God bless you all. I now have a proper understanding of what it is. Thanks again.
Thank you from UK. I thoroughly enjoyed the program. It has solidified my decision, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you from Connecticut. Good to see St. Joseph so well represented.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Thank you all.